Good. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about controlled folly. Anybody like the idea of that? Sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? Controlled folly. And this is an idea that actually comes to me from the writings of Carlos Castaneda. And in case you don't know his story, he was an anthropologist who in the early 1960s stumbled upon kind of a secret group of practitioners of what I call seekers of source. And they have variously been called, and as the books progress, they've been called men of knowledge, but there were women in it as well, so that was interesting. People of knowledge. And warriors. Carlos's teacher, Don Juan Matus, was trying to teach him to be open to alternative realities other than the Western mindset which he started out with. And one of the practices of this ancient group of Toltecs, and these are people that trace their lineage back way, way, way before the Spanish arrived. And in fact, they used the Spanish to hone their spirits. They kind of went underground, and they used the what they called the petty tyrant to take their spirituality, to take their ability to deal with whatever life showed up for them, whatever life gave them. They literally saw it as practice. So they welcomed the Spanish. They were like, cool, this is cool. We can really advance our own work by dealing with these crazy people who are going around killing everybody. So they developed a whole process of what they called controlled folly. And there were two practices. One was the art of dreaming, and one that, for lack of a better word, they called the art of stalking. Now, stalking is not what we think of it as today, some psychopath who's, following some movie star around. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about literally stalking ourselves, stalking the way we think, stalking the patterns that we have been participating in, that we've been kind of domesticated in. If you've heard of the book, The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz is from a different lineage of Toltecs. And if you read his stuff after reading the Castaneda stuff, you can kind of see his stuff is kind of watered down and nice. It's been made nice for us. The Castaneda stuff is pretty intense, and sometimes I can only handle little pieces of it. But it has tremendously helped me over the years, and I credit a lot of the work that I've done in neurolinguistics. The people that created neurolinguistics also read some of these books, so there is some connection. And Carlos Castaneda's last book, The Active Side of Infinity, which I highly recommend. If you ever want to read a Castaneda book, start with his last one, because it makes a lot more sense. Because a lot of the knowledge that was passed on by his teacher happened in altered states. And Castaneda himself, it took him years to recover the memories, and that's part of their teaching process. And it was a teaching process that is probably about 10,000 years old. These Toltecs were so able to understand reality that they literally, I think, they used a very scientific approach, and they were able to literally leave this world and go into other worlds and come back. And that was mostly the dreamers. The dreamers were able to create a kind of a lucid dreaming where they could literally leave this place in their full body, go someplace else in an instant and come back. And I don't know if I believe all that stuff, but the very practical stuff in their other practice, the art of stalking, or AKA the art of controlled folly, has really helped me just to live life and to stalk myself. And the reason they chose the word stalking is because it's easier to say stalker than it is controlled folly maker. I actually prefer controlled folly. And so this summer, one of the goals that I set when we installed goals into our timeline was a very simple, ridiculously dumbass goal. and that was to wash my kitchen floor every week, because it seems to me to be pointless. It's just going to get dirty again, and I wash it. It looks exactly the same after I wash it than it does before I wash it, because it's kind of an older floor, and it just seems pointless. But that's an act of controlled folly. It's like, I'm going to do it. There's no meaning to it. There's no purpose. It's just going to get dirty again. What's the point? But the point is, it's a conscious act that I do with the idea that there's no reward for it. And yet the very act of doing it is sweet. And I was excited. I was at the food co-op and I got some special orange floor cleaner stuff. And I was like, I can't wait till Tuesday. I'm going to wash my floor. That's an act of controlled folly. So, and even doing this tonight, I was like, okay, I took a leap. And I'm like, I'm gonna pay the $250 to rent this place and see if I can get 12 people to pay $20. And I only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, halfway. But instead of my old pattern, which threatened to come in of, what's the point? Nothing I ever do ever works out. It's like, fine, it's an act of controlled folly. I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to be unattached to the outcome as best I can. And if I'm not totally, completely detached from the outcome, well, I'll work on that the next time. It's literally working on ourselves, even though it's pointless and hopeless, because we're all going to die. What's the point? We're all going to die. However, to do something well for the very sake of doing it well is, I think, one of the most beautiful acts of controlled folly. And in and of itself, it's joyful. So Castaneda has this cool book called The Wheel of Time, which kind of goes through all of the books that he wrote. And he went back after he finished The Active Side of Infinity, and he kind of went back, and when he first started writing the books, he was an anthropologist. And he thought like an anthropologist, like a Western-trained anthropologist. And he had an agenda to find out lineages and family trees, and Don Juan was this yaqui Indian, this old guy who dressed, kind of in, a little straw hat, and he lived in a little hut, and Carlos would drive from California down to the Sonoran Desert where this guy lived. And he said, I want to know about plants. I want to know about medicinal plants. And so Don Juan was like, I know a little bit about that. If you'll, show up, I'll teach you. And Carlos was like, I'll pay you. No, it's okay. You don't have to pay me. And Carlos couldn't figure out why this guy was teaching him all this stuff. And the reason he was teaching him was because Carlos Castaneda had a specific energy formation in his luminous sphere that fit what Don Juan was looking for in his gift to the future, which was to take his knowledge and pass it to the next generation. So the very act of Don Juan teaching his knowledge to Carlos Castaneda, who A, didn't want to learn it, and B, had no clue what it was he was even being taught, was a supreme act of controlled folly. So, and eventually, what I love about the active side of infinity is Don Juan kind of reveals that it was all an act. Like, he lived in Mexico City, and he dressed in fine tailored business suits, and he had investments. He was a very successful business person. But in order to hook Carlos's interest and his attention, he pretended to be this guy that Carlos wanted him to be. And he just laughed his ass off. He said, "You really fell for that old Indian crap, didn't you? Man, you just fell hook, line, and sinker." As later on, he's revealing all of the stuff that he was doing, but it was all an act of controlled folly. And I love see if I can share something with you. I marked the page that I wanted to share. Where was it? Is it here? Okay. The art of stalking, or AKA the art of controlled folly making, is a set of procedures and attitudes that enables a warrior to get the best out of any conceivable situation. The recommendation for warriors is not to have any material things on which to focus their power, but to focus it on the spirit, on the true flight into the unknown, not on trivialities. Everyone who wants to follow the warrior's path has to get rid himself of the compulsion to possess and hold on to things. And I promised 3 things, but they're actually 7 things. So let's see if it looks like I have time. Good. And they're short. So the idea is that a warrior is never under siege. And he uses the idea of a warrior as kind of the peaceful warrior was also kind of a ripoff of the Castaneda books. But the principle is sound, that the act of kind of being at war means you're bringing your best self. You know, it's thinking strategically, it's wasting nothing, it's paying attention to things that you wouldn't pay attention if you're just goofing off. You know, it's kind of an alert. And a lot of people in business, you know, are very fond of the work of the Taoist Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and you know, the principles work in business. A warrior's never under siege. To be under siege implies that one has personal possessions that could be blockaded. A warrior has nothing in the world except his impeccability, and impeccability cannot be threatened. And by impeccability, what he means is not a moral thing, but the right use of energy. And when we are not wasting our energy in self-pity, being a victim, self-absorption, narcissism, and all the things that kind of plague our modern world, we have an immense amount of energy that's then available to explore the universe at large. So the first principle of the art of stalking, the art of controlled folly, is that warriors choose their battleground. And Lao Tzu would say the same thing, you know. You want to choose your battleground. A warrior never goes into battle without knowing what the surroundings are. Number 2, to discard everything that is unnecessary is the second principle of the art of controlled folly. A warrior doesn't complicate things. He aims at being simple. He applies all the concentration he has to decide whether or not to enter the battle. For any battle is a battle for his life. And this is the third principle of the art of stalking. A warrior must be willing and ready to make his last stand here and now, but not in a helter-skelter way. And for me, this has been really helpful in just showing up and going, okay, it's not what I wanted it to be. It's not this, it's not that. It is what it is. I'm going to show up and do my best. And it's also interesting, the whole process of Transformation Tuesday. I started out by bringing this big sound system and trying out all these different things, and over the weeks I've simplified it more and more and more, which is kind of, it's like, oh, I guess I'm kind of doing this even though I wasn't setting out to do that. Number 4, a warrior relaxes and abandons him or herself. He fears nothing. Only then will the powers that guide human beings open the road for a warrior and aid him. Only then. And that is the 4th principle of the art of controlled folly. Number 5, when faced with odds that cannot be dealt with, warriors retreat for a moment. They let their minds meander. They occupy their time with something else. Anything will do. And that is the 5th principle. And for me, it's like every dead end is a new way out. You know, when you stop going, oh, God, and you just kind of relax and step back a little bit and go, okay, this wasn't working or didn't turn out the way I wanted. Let's take a little break. Let's step back. Let's see what else needs to happen so that we can move forward. Number 6, and this is part of hypnosis as well, because time is malleable, and we play with time a lot, particularly in the timeline stuff that I teach and practice. Warriors compress time. This is the 6th principle of the art of controlled folly. Even an instant counts. In a battle for your life, a second is an eternity that may decide the outcome. Warriors aim at succeeding, therefore they compress time. They don't waste an instant. And then number 7, in order to apply the 7th principle of the art of stalking, one has to apply the other 6. A stalker never pushes himself to the front. He's always looking on from behind the scenes. And one of the cool stories from the Castaneda's teaching is Don Juan's teacher, the Nahual Julian, would pretend to be this old guy. And he met Don Juan when Don Juan was wounded, and he was kind of the assistant, set up himself up as the assistant to a healer. And, he was like, oh, the healer says to do this, the healer says to do that. And Don Juan kind of did it, and there's a whole long story involved. But it turns out that this guy, Don Juan's teacher, was actually the healer, but he never presented himself as the healer. He always took kind of a background approach. So you never really knew what was really going on, which is kind of fun. So combining these, applying these principles, brings about 3 results. The first is that stalkers learn to never take themselves seriously. Been working on that one. They learn to laugh at themselves. If they're not afraid of being a fool, they can fool anyone. And the second is that stalkers learn to have endless patience. Stalkers are never in a hurry, they never fret. And the third is that stalkers learn to have an endless capacity to improvise. So I come back to that over and over and over again. And these books, I've read them dozens and dozens of times. And every time I have found something new in them, and something that has really been helpful to me. And this next one comes in. Warriors, because they are stalkers, understand human behavior to perfection. They understand, for instance, that human beings are creatures of inventory. Knowing the ins and outs of a particular inventory is what makes a man a scholar or an expert in any field. Warriors know that when an average person's inventory fails, the person either enlarges his inventory or his world of self-reflection collapses. The average person is able to incorporate new items into his inventory if the new items don't contradict the inventory's underlying order. But if the items contradict that order, the person's mind collapses. The inventory is the mind. Warriors count on this when they attempt to break the mirror of self-reflection. So, for me, a lot of this self-help stuff that I've been involved in has been on the surface to make my life better. And it has done that. But ultimately, what we are looking for, if you look at every single spiritual practice, it has really been the attempt to let go of the things we cling to in our inventory, to be able to be fluid and formless, in the words of Castaneda, to be able to respond in the present moment appropriately. And there's a whole story of the Zen teaching. Someone would go into the Zen monastery, a new student, and I think I shared this story before, and the Zen master would have a wooden or bamboo practice sword, and he would be constantly leaping out from behind things and attacking the new student. And the new student's job was to try to defend himself. And eventually the new student would not be able to defend himself. He would just give up. He would try to be alert, but the Zen master always got him. He always tagged him. He always just nailed him. And so eventually the student would just give up, and just kind of his inventory of, I have to defend myself, would collapse. And then the Zen teacher would say, now you're ready to learn, because you know that you don't know how to do this. And he would go on to say that the Zen master was infinitely childlike, because nothing surprised him. And he talked about a couple of Zen masters were sitting at the table, and someone just threw a glass of water at him, And he's like, he was not swayed. He was not taken off his center in any way. And I think this is something we kind of sense is possible. We sense it's possible, and in our daily life, we get tangled up in stuff, we get caught in our old patterns, and we want to have some kind of tool to actually clear stuff. And one of the assignments that Castaneda was given by his teacher, Don Juan, was to eliminate self-importance. Like, how do you do that? Well, self-importance is the victim. Because if we are always victims, that's it's a way of feeling important. You know, I'm so important that someone's attacking me, right? And so letting go of self-pity and the victim mindset is one step we can make. That's why I have on my wall, stop thinking like a victim. That's not for my clients. That's for me. Because I was the biggest victim thinker that I've ever met. And it has been probably 25 or almost 30 years now of it, really trying to catch myself every time I fall into that old pattern. And it's in the song, I got to brush myself off. You know, there's still work to do, right? And it's all about loving yourself exactly as you are. And if you truly love yourself, this is not self-importance. Self-love is not self-importance. Self-importance is that part of us that gets upset when someone cuts us off in traffic because, well, that person did not give us the self-importance that we are due. They didn't take care of us. So we feel offended, you know? It's like that sense of us that gets offended, that's our self-importance, and it takes a massive amount of energy. So if you think of a computer and the stuff that happens on the computer, what we call the desktop. You know, if you have a bunch of programs running in the background, it will slow everything down. And our self-importance is running in the background all the time. And if we didn't have that, nothing would disappoint us, right? We would have like no expectations. And, you know, like even today, as I came here, my usual Tuesday stuff starts coming up, and I can watch it and I can see it, and I go, okay, as soon as I start the program, it's going to disappear, and I'm going to feel like, wow, this was amazing and a wonderful opportunity. It didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, but when I take the idea that it's an act of controlled folly, and it doesn't matter anyway, and it's all good, then the energy comes and it flows again. But when we kind of clench, when we it's got to be this way, and if it doesn't, this always happens, and I can never get ahead, and all the stuff that chitter chat that comes up, that is our self-importance. That's the self-pity. So one of the assignments is to get rid of that. But Don Juan never tells Carlos how to do that. For me, NLP and learning how to run my own mind was like the key to like, there's a process I'm doing to make myself feel miserable. And if I can stalk that process and catch myself and interrupt it, then I can access an immense amount of joy and free up energy. And when I free up that energy, all of a sudden, I don't need a nap anymore every day. I used to be dragging around, and yeah, I improved my diet, but at the same time, you know, I would feel this heaviness and it would weigh me down, and kind of like in the Ocean of Dreams song, it's like, I have often in my life felt so damn fragile, and like, you know, I almost couldn't handle being here. And the idea that what if we treated all of this with the joyful idea that it's all controlled folly, and that we are stalking ourselves in a loving way, not a critical way, but a loving way. And when we do the thing we always do, to smile and just go, hey, you know what? It's okay. This always happens. It's great. And we're going to move through it, and it's going to be okay. And this is part of what we are here to do. And the challenge for me is when I have my stuff up, it's hard to remember that. And more, I'm kind of turning my head towards that. And diminishing or moving stuff off my mental movie screen, that is the old pattern. And that, again, is the art of stalking. And what's the point? There's no point. It just feels good. So, man, I can talk. Jeez, time has gone by. It's now 10 o'clock. How did that happen? Just kidding. I want to see how deep you were in trance. So, any thoughts about this? Any questions about this? I'm happy to take questions from the floor. And a hush falls over the crowd. So, while you guys are thinking of a question, there was a song that I wanted to sing, and it's a song I know pretty well, but I didn't practice it, and I have to find it. So, if you can think of a question, that would be cool. If not, that's okay too.
How about...
I found it, yeah.
Question.
Yes.
What are some of the other mental movie screen techniques that you use? We talked about some stuff.
Right. So what are some of the other mental movie screen techniques? And essentially, we have three main ways that we process and represent stuff to ourselves. So we have the visual and we have the movie screen, and we are constantly bringing images up, memories, imagining things in the future. And for those of us who do anxiety really well, we can bring up a worst case scenario on our mental movie screen quite rapidly and go all IMAX with it and literally trigger our fight or flight, cortisol, adrenaline, freak ourselves out, because your unconscious mind does not know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. But if we take charge of what's on our movie screen, we can change our body's physiological response. So that's kind of the movie screen. And you can take something and move it behind you. You can push it off into the distance. You can shrink it down. You can fade it out. You can make it dim. You can make it fuzzy. You can move stuff over here. You can just shrink stuff down. You can make a cartoon. I had a client recently who had kind of a panic attack in front of a class of students. And that particular class, he was so embarrassed about his having the panic attack, and imagined them, making fun of him or whatever. And I suggested to him that he just go ahead and imagine something about those students that would be embarrassing to them, and to shrink them down and make them small so that they weren't as big a deal. So that's one technique. The other thing is we have the auditory channel. We are saying stuff to ourselves all the time. Usually it's not nice, it's not helpful. We've installed the critical teacher, critical parent voice sometimes. And one of the reasons why I put a lot of linguistic stuff into my songs is so you play one of my songs, get it stuck in your head, and that will replace the negative self-talk. However, you can also turn it down. You can also change it. You can change it into a Mickey Mouse voice. Oh, you can't do that. Or you can change it into kind of a sexy, oh, you can't do that. You could, whatever the little voice is saying, you can play with it. It doesn't have to sound the way it's always sounded. You're the one running it, right? You're the one playing that track over and over again. And then finally, the kinesthetic. We feel things in our body and we think, oh, I feel this in my stomach. And I have a whole process where I can ask people questions like, does it have a shape? Does it have a texture? Does it have, is the movement? Does it have weight? Does it have a color? And by kind of asking people that, they'll go, oh, well, it's dark and it's prickly, or it's kind of nebulous and sticky, whatever they think about it. And whatever it is, I will start suggesting, well, what happens if you make it tiny? What happens if you make it big? What happens if you make it fluffy? What happens if you make it smooth? Change the color from black to, I don't know, pink. Change to Pepto-Bismol color, whatever. Try different things. And I would say almost every time someone goes, oh, it's gone. Because they just changed their representing it to themselves. And again, I think I talked about it last week or the week before, that literally pain is an opinion that your body has. And you can change opinions, right? So, what is real? We don't know. I had a stabbing pain in my shoulder, and this was years ago, and the person that I was with was kind of an energy healer, and she goes, "Oh, there's a spear there," and she like put her foot on my back and pulled it out like she was actually pulling a spear out, and the pain went away just like that. Now, was there really a spear there, or was there somehow I was constructing a thought of something, and her use of calling it a spear was kind of hypnosis, and I agreed on an unconscious level, oh, probably is a spear. And when she pulled it out, it's gone now. I mean, literally your unconscious mind works like that. It believes stuff. So what are we believing on a daily basis that is causing us to feel miserable? What if we could stalk ourselves and, as an act of controlled folly, go, you know what? I've been believing this about myself all my life. What if that's something I actually made up? What if that's something that isn't necessarily true? And it's just on my mental movie screen, and as we did earlier in the summer, just move it off. Get it off of the mental movie screen and pull in from wherever you have it what you want to be true, and then live as if that's true, right? And practice living it as if it's true, and eventually that becomes true. So it's like our world changes depending on what we are believing about it. And sometimes it seems like the world is really a place, and it's like it is, and changing our thoughts doesn't change the world. But if you actually play with your thoughts more and more, you will notice that the world does change. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes too, because sometimes it seems like, no matter all the work I've done on myself, why do I still have problems? Oh, well, we still have problems because we are still working on letting go of our attachments, letting go of the stuff we can't control, and really practicing being in this present moment. And so, what are we doing time? Oh, cool, 7:50. So that was a good question. Did I actually answer it? Cool. So we also have our olfactory and our gustatory channels. So like, I was sitting in a healing energy circle with some students years and years ago when I was studying with the Barbara Brennan healer. And we would do this whole weekend, and then the teacher of the class, we'd have a little check-in, and we'd just go around the circle, and people would say where they were and what they were experiencing. And this woman next to me, just before she spoke, I got a smell. Of like I had sanded a floor, and it was kind of the smell like if you didn't move the sander and you just left it in one spot, it kind of like the friction would ignite. Like you could literally start a fire if you just left the sander in the one place and didn't move it. And I got that smell. And then she spoke, and she was like, I am so angry. It was like I was literally picking up in my energy field an olfactory representation of what my body was sensing in her, right? So sometimes our smell, is malleable as well, and taste as well. But to kind of swing back a little bit to our rapport building, if someone is saying like, oh man, that's sweet, you can kind of match and mirror their language. Or if, most people tend to use visual, auditory, or kinesthetic language, but every once in a while they'll drop in a taste or a smell. Oh, that stinks. Yeah, I know what you mean. I can smell it. So you can literally, whatever language somebody is using, you can enter their world by matching some of the images, sounds, or descriptions of their world that they're using. And none of it's true. It's just literally we are representing to ourselves what this stuff is outside of us. And one of the things I really enjoy about the Carlos Castaneda books is that they talk about the world as an interpretation of energy. And because we kind of have an agreement, we are literally creating this room, all of us who are here, right? And it's hard to even wrap our minds around that, but we are in the midst of the vastness of the universe. And even though we kind of think they're planets and stuff, these ancient Toltecs went so deep with this that they literally could go into other worlds and come back. And I think that's kind of cool. I don't expect to ever be able to do that. I just want to get my life together so that I can take to the world what I was given to do, which is to share this music and these ideas with people. And so far, I am just doing it as an act of controlled folly, and I will continue to do it as an act of controlled folly. And sometimes, like the next 2 weeks, I need to step away and see if there's another way to do it that may be better, or I may continue doing it the way I was doing it. We'll see. And I want to thank you guys for your support and for being willing to show up, and that's awesome. And I want to sing another song unless there's a question. Any questions? Cool.